Hello, welcome back to another video, and today we'll be going over my Distinction College art book. I have a simple title page here, and the theme is Beyond Lightness, Portrait Interpretations. And first we come to the mind map and mood board. I've got medias like photography, clay, animation, and I put things down like TV shows, likes and dislikes, reflection, skin. And for artists, I've got people like Tracey Emin, Lewis Wayne, and Vincent van Gogh. But I also like to distinguish my online artists versus my practical ones. Come to my main interests within the project, so photography, personal items, family, mental health, symbolism. Come to the mood board, and I've got portrait collages, photography of old age, artists that I've wrote down that relate to the project within portraiture and mental health. So now we come to my first artist page on Brian Charnley. I searched him due to his correlation with self-portraiture and mental health. Got diagnosed with schizophrenia and his works got stranger and stranger. Some of his early works did information on how he got his ideas. He kept a dream diary for many years as a source of his poetic imagery, and it could also help him understand his condition. He used the dreams to create adaptations of his feelings and thoughts, turn him into the layered scenic works. He was encouraged to make a lot of these pieces by the CEO of Sane, a mental health charity. Here I do a quick visual analysis of his piece Crossing the Border. I write down how you can see how Van Gogh is an influence on his work. I also point out the symbolism within the piece. What I wanted to mainly focus on with this artist is his self-portrait series, how the portraits get more abstract and more expressive as he is slowly coming off certain medication. These are his first self-portraits in the series. With my artist research, I always include maybe a piece from an interview or an entry they've wrote themselves. I go over what I want to take from the artist and what I like about them. So I admire the self-expression of Brian Charnley, and I've been trying to push myself into creative pieces for me to express my own thoughts and feelings. We get to the final pages of the research, and on this page I show his final self-portrait in his series. As you see, there's not much to go off from it, but that's why we can visual analyse it and maybe interpret it in a way. I'll put a reference here. It's like a depth of pain. It could also be an indicator of the thoughts fully washing over him, sitting back and watching them form into a puddle of colour, how he perceives himself maybe. I also put his artist statement down. It's a very poetic piece of writing. I think it shows who Brian Charnley really was in his final year. I also want to add on that this is a lot of information for an artist research page, but because my ideas surrounding this project is mental health within self-portraiture, it's all relevant for me. Next we come to photographer Teju Cole. I like Teju Cole because of his focus on culture, memories and just life. I also remember to add in interview pieces. I like how you can look at his pictures and it could have a meaning of something completely different. As for his orange piece here, it's from a series of still lifes, the golden apple of the sun, and this picture is accompanied by a Cole discussing the 2020 American presidential election. I also researched Teju Cole for a project within a project that I'll get into later, called A Day in the Life. We have our last artist research page before I get into some practical work, and this is Lewis Wayne. He also had schizophrenia, and that's something I wanted to focus on. So I just write down his story up to his diagnosis. He started off with illustrations in newspapers. I discuss how I think his art was modern for the time, and how there's a contrast of colour in his work. I also go over how I like the colours of his work. It reminds me of Vincent van Gogh. Next we have a response to Lewis Wayne. So it's a short little comic type of thing that I made. I wrote a little bit of stuff about the colour, about the media I used, how I could expand it further, maybe into a full painted piece, and focusing more on the background. I had fun doing this, and it's really cute. So these are some figure drawings, some basic life drawing stuff. With this we aim to use a bunch of different medias in a small amount of time. Now we come to the first time I've ever used charcoal, and this is a big step for me as charcoal is now one of my primary medias, and being introduced to it has really helped me through my journey. Here we come to one of my first experimentations. This was inspired by Teju Cole. So this is a photography piece with mixed media. As you can see, it looks like I've burned the piece, stitched into it. I also bleached it, and I just give a bit of an explanation. So I like this type of mixed media. I also make note of how a collection of pieces would be cool, but also saying that a single piece by itself is also very standout. Also, don't be afraid to add extra information in. Now we have some more figure drawing with different medias, charcoal, pencil and oil pastel, focusing on portraiture development. Now we have some collagraph printing experiments. What I really should have done with this is make some notes for them, as I didn't like this activity at all, but from future projects I now know to do all this whenever experimenting. Just because maybe you don't like an experiment, still put it in your book, maybe in a separate folder or something like that, so they can see you've at least tried it. It can also still potentially get you marks as well. These are some more experiments. I should have made notes on how they could maybe help me with development. We now have some charcoal portraits. As you can see, that's my first attempt. These are the two final little practices in the mini-series, and I made a note at the top to photocopy my charcoal works, as you can see they're all a little bit scuffed from rubbing together. Now we come to my proposal. In my proposal I talk about how experimentation is the way I want to go. I discuss what ideas I like most about the project, so the deep sides and mental health, identity, mixed media pieces. I talk about what research I've done already to help towards it. Talk about what I've already explored and how I could improve. Talk about how I can stay on time, and talk about peer feedback. And then I talk about what I aim to create in the project, which is some successful portrait outcomes, as well as good research that continues to link within the project. So with this artist page, I do kind of go against what I stated in my proposal, because I didn't really end up using this artist for anything, but I still made a good page out of it, including some interview pieces, what I like about him, what I think about the composition of his work, and stuff like that. Now we have a bit of secondary research. So this is a page on The Sopranos. I really like The Sopranos and I wanted to include it into this project. You can really have anything as research in your project as long as you can link it to the project. And I know I could, because there are themes of men's mental health throughout, and there's a lot of symbolism within the show. Again, just more information on me explaining the symbolism in the show. And I've got some illustrations here of some crows, which is a big symbolism in it. I also made a charcoal outcome of the main character. I made sure to write down that it was photocopied, how long it took. For this we have another experiment, so I used a projector for this one with some simple photography, and I explain a little bit behind it. I say how the colour didn't show up on the projector, but I can develop further with it like I did here, going over some mark making over the pictures, going with the colour, just going wild with it. So here we have some peer feedback, and I remember asking for an overall review of my book. I also remember asking if my work and my outcomes respond to the brief, and do they also link to my ideas of what I want within the project. I think when receiving and giving peer feedback, it is good to ask the question, what specifically do you want from this? Now we come to my project within a project, a day in a life. So this was a time-based project, and we had to take pictures of a day in our life. We had to make it quite story-based and have it make sense and have some ideas around it and stuff like that. So now we come to the ideas and reflection about the piece. I used Teju Cole for the inspiration, focusing on colour, having the most important role in my story be colour, focusing on a childlike nature, and then slowly delving into a more of a realistic show of the world. I also kept in the pictures that I didn't use for my piece. I could have also worked with mixed media for this, but I actually stayed true to the photography. I just didn't really want to mess around with it, as I thought it looked nice just the way it was. Now we have a simple colour wheel showing colour and emotion. This is also just a quick charcoal outcome, and I wanted to put it in there just to show my progress. So here we have a stippling portrait outcome. I write about how I couldn't trust the process with it, and stippling works on a small scale better. This was actually a gift for someone, and I photocopied it and put it in my book. Now we come to an ideas and development page and just my thought process. So with this, I do a bit of an experiment with charcoal and acrylic. I write about how I think I have some ideas for it. I think I'm going to do a self-portrait using charcoal and acrylic, stating that it will be a charcoal portrait and the hair will be made out of acrylic. I also write about how I have another idea inspired by the symbolism in The Sopranos, using the crows as depictions for different things. Now I come to some charcoal development pieces. So I've got one there of Nosferatu, and I've got a random one here that I decided to do, showing my final charcoal development. Now we have my planning my final outcome page. On this page I go over everything, every little detail. So I state what I'm going to do, which is make a small mixed media animation, focusing on the mixed media part more than the animation sequence, saying how I want to push myself further on it, talking about the starting stages of the piece, what I need to do, how I'm going to do it, stating how I want the piece to feature a lot of colour, but for it to also have contrast. Since most of the narrative in my project is mental health, I wanted to connect it with that, and my hair plays a big part in my mental health and identity, so it would be featured around that. On this page I do a final charcoal practice before doing my final piece, and on this page it's a process of my final outcome, discussing how the charcoal portrait went, how I did it by photocopying each frame, changing the eyes. I also had a little bit of a peer review here, and in the peer review they definitely understand my message, and also here I have an interactive piece. Now we come to the very last 2 pages of my animation. On this page I express how I want more symbolism within my work, so I added little tiny puzzle pieces around, and the colour around me represents emotion. So as soon as the blue comes in, that's kind of sombre and sadness. I also talk about how I added the text to the piece, and I also talked about the challenges within the work. And this last page is talking about the music choice in my little animation, explaining what Radiohead means to me and how Radiohead links into my work. Now we come to the final evaluation. So in my final evaluation I talk about what I wanted to achieve in the project, what I wanted to explore, how I did it. I speak about how I set myself very easy goals and I didn't push myself enough, having everything be in good time and just there was a little bit room for extra. Speaking about how I researched everything, what the challenges I faced were, talking about how I didn't have enough experiments, talking about the medias I used in my final piece, talking about how I presented my pages, talking about how I would have displayed my piece. I do think there was room for some more stuff in this project, especially with some self-assessments and more development pages, discussing how experiments will help, maybe better artist research that could link thoroughly. And for my final piece there was a bit of room for research on that, so maybe an artist that works with hair, maybe an animation artist as well.